On the count of two, I'd like everybody to say, I'm ready. Here we go. 1, 2. Again? I thought I was ready. My itinerary said that we were to fly out of Honolulu at 12:05 a.m. Thursday, slightly after midnight. Said to my wife, that's fantastic. We've got another day that we can enjoy the sights and sounds of Honolulu. We loved the city, we loved the beaches. And so we really had a fantastic last day in Honolulu and packed our gear and trundled on out to the airport just slightly before midnight. Went to the check-in. The woman looked at our tickets and she said, Mr. Bradley, I've got some bad news for you. 12:05 a.m. is actually first thing Thursday morning. You've missed your flight by 24 hours. One day, Peter came to Jesus and he said, Lord, I'm ready to go to prison with you and even to die with you. And all Jesus can do is shake his head and say, oh, Peter, let me tell you how the next 24 hours are really going to play out. Clearly, it is possible to believe that you are ready for what's coming next, but in reality, not be ready at all. And as we come to the end of our series, we find Jesus nearing the end of his ministry. He knows that time is short. Much of his 3-year journey towards the cross has been spent trying to prepare his followers for life without him. But as the time approaches for his bloody encounter with the Romans and with the Sanhedrin, Jesus is becoming increasingly anxious that his gang of 12 have understood so very little of what he has been trying to tell them. He desperately wants them to know 3 things: that he's going to die, but that his death will not be the end, and they will see him again, not only a few days after placing him in a tomb, but again in the final days of Earth's history, and that thirdly, they should live in a state of expectation, of readiness for such a reunion, this profound occasion when their lives would unite with his for eternity. For Jesus, living in a state of readiness, a state of expectation for his physical return to earth was a big deal. In fact, he intended it to be a trademark of his tribe of followers down through history. So it begs the question, why was living in this posture of readiness so important to Jesus? Well, there's a number of answers that we could give to that question. Perhaps he wanted people to live with hope, because he knew all too well how effective sin is in spreading hopelessness and despair across the face of our planet. Perhaps he had an inkling that it could be hundreds, even thousands of years before he could deliver on his promise of returning. Perhaps he just knew that with time, the most natural of all human tendencies is to just drift. Like the proverbial hole in the bucket, you and I, we leak vision for our lives. We leak commitments to the very goals and ideals that we set for ourselves once upon a time. And so often, we come to lose our way. Well, whatever the reason, if living in a state of readiness was so important to Jesus, then we need to consider those things that act as barriers to living in expectation of Jesus' near return. And I'm sure we could list more barriers than the ones that I'm going to mention in the time that remains. But in that time, we're going to look at three barriers to living in a state of expectation. The first one I'd like to offer you this morning is complacency. And the key idea here is, as a people, so often we lose sight of the relevance of Jesus' end-time parables and prophecies to the circumstances of our lives. and to where we find ourselves here in 2017 at this point in human history. What does it all mean to me now, today? You hear sermon after sermon, for example, on the parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25. But if, like me, you are left wondering sometimes what the real meaning of this parable is for you in the 21st century. I mean, clearly, it's a story about one group of people who seem to be ready for an important event in their time, and another group who are not. But what does being ready really mean in our day? What would that look like? When I first became an Adventist 40 years ago, the answer to that question was relatively clear-cut. At the time, the church was gripped in something that I would call end-time mania. We all knew that we had to keep a close eye on those Sunday keepers. One day we were going to have to flee to the hills and hide in caves to avoid their patrols out seeking to capture us and force us to renounce the Sabbath. Being ready meant preparing yourself for such events. My auntie, for example, she had a little hut built for herself, which apparently was going to serve as some kind of end-time bunker. She named it Lookout, which I think was supposed to have some sort of apocalyptic significance. The odd thing about her little hut, though, which I could never quite understand, is that it was built on the top of a hill and was clearly visible from the surrounding roads, which kind of defeated the purpose of it, one would have thought. My point here is that not too long ago, the idea of being ready for the return of Christ had everything to do with a kind of logistical readiness, that you would scour your newspapers each day looking for any signs in the religious arena that it might be time to up and run. Signs of Catholic-Protestant alliances, Sunday laws, infiltration of the Adventist Church by Jesuits, the Illuminati, etc., etc. All of these things were high on the list of things to be looking out for. And in this model, the ready then were those with special divining skills, interpreters of the times. And you could get quite good at this, even as an amateur. After all, wasn't there something about earthquakes and divers places? I'm not sure where divers is, but clearly you don't want to live there. Weren't the stars supposed to do something and the moon turn red as 7 horses rode past blowing on trumpets or something like that? Okay, I'm exaggerating to make a point. 40 years on, the church appears to have grown tired of playing the watching game, and in some respects has backpedaled from its role as interpreters of the times. Now, undoubtedly, we did some important maturing as a denomination in that time, but in abandoning that approach to one extent or another, sadly, it seems to me as though the church has retreated into complacency, even bordering on apathy concerning end-time events. And it's not necessarily because people don't want Jesus to come or aren't excited about the thought of Jesus returning, but just that they have no objective measure any longer by which to judge if he's any more likely to return today than he was 40, 50, or 100 years ago. And so, because it all seems to be just too hard, the insidious withdrawal into complacency seems almost inevitable. Perhaps it's time then to reframe our understanding of what being a ready people means in 2017. If we can understand the 3 parables of Matthew 25 aright, is it possible that a more accurate picture of how Jesus truly intended you and I to live in the last days might emerge? There are 3 parables in Matthew 25. The parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents, and finally, the parable of the sheep and the goats. The first of these parables, that of the 10 virgins, gives us a clue as to how we should read the rest of the chapter. as well as the key to unlocking the point that Jesus was trying to make by telling these three parables. You see, what the 10 virgins who were denied access to the wedding feast were lacking was oil to fuel their lamps and the flame that would come from those lamps that were intended to light up the night and welcome the bridegroom. So question, in New Testament iconography, what is the oil and the flame traditionally used to represent? The Holy Spirit. Is it possible that what Jesus is saying in this parable is that living in a state of readiness has everything to do with your life and mine being infused with and directed by the Holy Spirit? Now, if we accept that that's what the parable is all about, and many different interpretations of the parable have been offered in the past, but if we accept that it's really all about lacking the Holy Spirit, when we read the remaining two parables in the chapter, they now make perfect sense. The two faithful servants who steward well the spiritual gifts, the talents, that they have received from the Holy Spirit, they bear much fruit, and they are commended by their master. Then again, in the parable of the sheep and the goats, clearly those who receive the commendations of the king are those who have lived a life manifesting the fruits of the Spirit, showing kindness to the poor, visiting the prisoner, feeding the hungry, clothing the homeless. In this model, then, the ready are those who are committed to spiritual growth, specifically growth through service. Being ready is not primarily about reading the times. Listen, it's about reading the heart of God. Reading the heart of God, who has a big heart for the poor, the homeless, and the prisoner. It's about recognizing that God has gifted you with the Holy Spirit, and it's your job to take hold of that gift and put it to good use. Just like the two faithful stewards in the parable of the talents. The flame from your lamp is meant to be burning every day, lighting up the darkness of this world. Your kindness to strangers, an expression of the infilling Spirit of Christ Himself in your life. The ready, then, are those who are filled with such a measure of the Holy Spirit that they naturally, reflexively manifest its fruits: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And when we understand that this is the principle at the heart of Matthew 25, our challenge in 2017 is to be ready people in the sense that we are actively pursuing personal growth, seeking the kingdom, serving with passion, serving with commitment. Let that be our definition of a ready people. Let us counter complacency and apathy by daily seeking ever-increasing portions of the Holy Spirit. Number 2, distraction. And here we're talking about the inability to focus on the things that really matter in life. There's not a teacher here in the audience who would disagree with me when I say that we live in the age of distraction. We see it in our students every single day. You and I inhabit a world which is not only getting noisier, but more and more distracting, producing something that experts have called a crisis of attention. Microsoft published a report just recently that argued that the widespread usage of smartphones has led to the deterioration of our attention span from 12 seconds in 2000 to 8 seconds today. And this coming at a time when a 32-year study that tracked the fortunes of a group of 1,000 students found that their ability to concentrate was the number one predictor of success in life. They found in their research that the ability to concentrate was a more significant predictor of future success than IQ or socioeconomic status. We all like to try and convince ourselves that we've mastered the art of multitasking. But all the research suggests that the idea of multitasking is a myth. When people say that they're multitasking, what they are really doing is living in a state which experts have labelled continuous partial attention. This is where the brain switches back and forth very quickly from one task to another. The problem is, as research has shown, is that as we switch back and forth between homework or our responsibilities in the workplace and text messages and social media and so on, our ability to focus on any one of those tasks erodes dramatically. Hence, exactly why we have had to introduce a law to prevent us from texting while driving. Our brains, but especially those of our children, are being asked to process so much incoming data compared to our grandparents' day. Data from email, texts, Snapchats, tweets, Google searches, Facebook, Instagram, and so on, that to cope, we just skim across the surface of our days, dividing our energies between multiple tasks and conversations such that we end the day exhausted, dissatisfied, and discouraged. How many times have you walked in the door and the first thing that you've said to your partner is, "I'm so tired"? Hence why a whole industry has grown up in recent times around such offerings as yoga classes, meditation, simplicity living, cognitive behavior therapy, and mindfulness. All of these industries have grown up as an antidote to the toxic effects of overloaded minds and schedules. In one of Jesus' parables, you'll remember, a man sends out invitations by the truckload, inviting people to this magnificent banquet that he has prepared for them. But they all have to make excuses because they're so distracted by the lives that they're leading that they just don't have the time to come. They just weren't ready to set aside the things that they had foolishly come to believe were more important than hanging out with God. Friends, that's a picture of the modern world. It's a picture of the lives that you and I so often lead. All of this to say that we are people of unquiet souls. Rhetorical, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. How many people here, if they were honest, would say that they go through the majority of days in their week with perfectly quiet souls? Don't answer that question, reflect on it. A day when you have not been required to multitask, you got to work on a single task or project for the entire day, and that's all that you did. A day when you didn't clock out frustrated by all the things that you didn't get done that day. How many of you live in that kind of world? Our attention can be so easily diverted away from the things in life that are the most important, that most contribute to happiness. Paul tells us that whatever is holy, whatever is good, spend your time thinking about these things and doing these things. Well, you can't. You can't do that when your soul is not quiet. You cannot live in a state of readiness where the Holy Spirit is progressively transforming your life when, like the seed that fell amongst the thorns, the cares and the anxieties of this world are choking the very life out of you. We must ruthlessly eliminate hurry. Otherwise, we will live in a constant state of anxiety with no time or energy to devote to the things that truly matter. Now more than ever, we need to remember that the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Third and final barrier to living in this state of expectation and readiness that Jesus asked us to adopt is doubt. And here we're talking about the subtle drift from faith into doubt. Jesus once pondered the question aloud, when I come back again, will I find faith on the earth? Would he find faith in your heart? Would he find faith in mine? Look, I don't know your story, but I think I'm pretty safe in saying that there's not one person here this morning who doesn't have a really good reason not to be a Christian. Let's list the reasons. Unanswered prayer, unanswered questions, disappointment with God, terrible experiences with religion, hurtful words from other people, judgmentalism, hypocrisy. The list could go on. But here's the honest truth. Everybody doubts. There is no one immune to the way that doubt often creeps up behind us in times of stress, in times of heartache. Yes, it's true that Jesus said, "Blessed are those who can believe without seeing," but it's a challenge. It's a sentiment far easier to preach than to live out consistently because, let's face it, the visible, tangible world is the one that we live in. We haven't trained ourselves. We haven't learnt well enough yet how to live as though the invisible world is just as real as this one that we can touch, see, and feel. Jesus was capable of living that way, and I believe that many highly spiritual people throughout history have also been able to live that way. But for most of us, we long to see visible, tangible answers to our prayers and questions. And when we don't, doubt is never too far away. So yes, it's true. All of us doubt from time to time. But you know, at the end of the day, you have to give your life to something. Did you know that everybody lives by faith? You either have faith in the belief that everything about the universe, your existence, the planet upon which you live, the people that you love and the people that love you, that all of these things are the result of completely random and indifferent forces that don't really care whether you are here or not. They might grant you 70-odd years of existence, but have absolutely no hesitation in snuffing you out, never to be heard of again. So you either have faith in that, or you embrace the faith of the Bible, which declares that everything around you is the product of design, the product of intent, the product of purpose. That when you break the universe down, it's pure mathematics in its structure, and that the order that we observe in the universe suggests a mind behind it all. After all, isn't it just logical that it would take a mind to create a mind? And so you will choose. If you choose the faith of the Bible, no one is suggesting that life's going to be easy or that there will be no questions, but you will find something that you can give your life to. A story that boldly declares that goodness rules the universe and that the good will bring the story of this planet to a close, and the good will fold you into a brand new story that's just waiting to be written. That's what we need to be ready for. That's what you need to be ready for. The triumph of the good. The day when the visible and the invisible worlds collide and become one. 17th century mathematician Blaise Pascal became famous for a line of reasoning that's come to be known over the years as Pascal's wager. His argument was that all humans make a wager or place a bet with their lives. And the bet that they place is either that God exists or that he does not. He argues that no one can avoid the necessity of betting, of placing a wager, as we only get one life and one chance to answer the question, does God really exist? His reasoning: if it turns out that there is no God, you've lost nothing by living as though he did exist. You've lost nothing. Why? Well, hopefully you've lived a life of integrity. Hopefully you've raised children who have been given the opportunity to experience the wonder and the beauty of life. In your own small way, perhaps, hopefully, you've made the world a better place. If it turns out that God doesn't exist and you did all of those things, you've lost nothing. I mean, would you have really wanted to live any other way than that? Anyway. But if you're right and there is a God, then you have gained everything and lost nothing. So at the essence of Pascal's wager was this idea: bet on God. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. There will be days in your life and in mine when that will have to be enough. Times when we have to choose to believe. Yes, choose, because faith and belief will not always come reflexively. To believe even when the rest of the world treats you as a curiosity or dismisses you altogether. And in your faith, mysteriously, you will find a peace, a calm that the world cannot give you. I'd like to challenge us all today to be a ready people, ready to resist complacency, to eliminate distraction, and to doubt your doubts. And it all begins with seeking the infilling of the Spirit, remembering that we only have as much of the Spirit as we have of this book read, understood, and believed. So let us also be a people of the Word. Someone once said that the most powerful weapon on earth is the human soul on fire. We might have some more waiting to do before Jesus returns, but that is simply just more time for us to be powerful weapons for good. And that too is a gift. Everyone say, I'm ready. I'm ready. Again.